Remember school in the 1970s? Classrooms were ruled with fear, not fairness. Teachers didn't just scold you, they made examples out of you, often in ways that left lasting scars. Some say it built character, but today those same punishments would trigger lawsuits and headlines. But here's the real question. Could kids today survive a 1970s classroom? Stick around, because we're counting down 25 punishments from the 70s that are now completely forbidden. And trust me, number 25 will leave you shaking your head, wondering how this was ever allowed. Number 1, the paddle in the principal's office. Nothing symbolized 70s school discipline more than the dreaded wooden paddle. Sometimes drilled with holes so it stung more, it was proudly displayed in the principal's office, like a badge of authority. Kids who were sent to the office knew exactly what they had coming. A bent-over desk, a firm grip on the edge, and swats that could leave you sore for days. The sound of the paddle cracking down was almost worse than the pain itself, echoing through the halls as a warning to everyone else. To teachers and principals, fear of the Board of Education was the fastest way to correct behavior. Today, the very thought of a parent calmly accepting that their child was physically beaten by school staff is shocking. However, back then, corporal punishment wasn't questioned. It served as a public reminder of who held the power. And if you thought the paddle was humiliating, wait until you hear about the punishments designed to break you down in front of everyone. Number 2, the dunce cap. Though it already faded by the 1970s, some old-fashioned teachers still kept a dunce cap tucked away in the classroom closet. The cone-shaped hat, often decorated with the word dunce in big bold letters, forced kids to sit in the corner like a clown from a circus. Classmates would chuckle or whisper, and the embarrassment cut deeper than any physical punishment. The goal here was to brand you as the fool of the classroom instead of correcting your behavior. Some students carried that shame long after school, remembering the humiliation every time they stumbled in public. Today, shaming a child like this would go viral and likely cost a teacher their job. But in the 70s, a handful of classrooms still used this outdated tradition, thinking embarrassment would turn mischief into obedience. And if you think sitting in the corner was bad, the next punishment stripped your pride away. Number 3, standing in the corner or hallway. Getting isolated in the corner or hallway was the ultimate sign of isolation. Teachers sometimes made you stand with your nose against the wall, hands folded, for what felt like an eternity. Other times you were shoved out into the hallway, forced to face a sea of passing students and staff with nowhere to hide. And it was humiliating, especially when the principal or another teacher strolled past with that disapproving stare. The punishment wasn't really about reflection or self-control. It was about making an example out of you. Everyone who saw you heard the message loud and clear: step out of line, and this will be you. Today, public shaming of this kind would be criticized as cruel, unhelpful, and emotionally damaging. But back then, it was a quick and easy way for teachers to establish dominance. And if isolation wasn't enough, some punishments kept you trapped long after the final bell rang. Number 4, after-school detention. Don't think of this as the quiet, supervised study hall you see today. After-school detention in the 70s was a whole different beast, and it often turned into unpaid labor. Teachers would hand you rags and make you scrub chalkboards, scrape gum off desks, or even clean cafeteria tables. Hours spent in an empty classroom felt like an eternity, especially if you had sports practice, a shift at work, or a ride waiting at home. Parents rarely complained, since many saw it as extra discipline or even free janitorial help. But for the kids stuck inside watching the clock crawl toward dinner time, detention wasn't about learning from mistakes. It was about wasting your time as payback. Today, forcing kids into this kind of labor would spark outrage from parents and advocacy groups alike. But what teachers demanded during class itself was straight up outrageous. Number 5, writing repetitive lines on the chalkboard. Only a few punishments filled you with more dread than endless chalkboard lines. Hours of repetition left your hands cramping, your shirt covered in chalk dust, and your classmates whispering as you wrote like a machine. Some teachers even made kids fill entire notebooks with lines before they were allowed to leave, turning the exercise into merciless torture. The punishment was nowhere near about reflection or growth. It was about grinding obedience into your brain, one line at a time. In reality, it did nothing but frustrate students and build resentment toward school. Today, repetitive punishment like this would be seen as pointless, psychologically draining, and a complete waste of time. Yes, your wrist ached from writing, but the next punishment hurt in a whole different way. But tell us, which of these punishments do you remember from your school days? Drop it in the comments. We love hearing your stories and might feature them in future videos. Number 6. The ruler across the knuckles. The wooden ruler was more than a measuring tool in Catholic and private schools. It was a literal weapon. A sharp crack across the knuckles delivered by a strict teacher could leave kids flinching in pain and fighting back tears. Some rulers even had metal edges, making the sting even worse. Students often described the fear of seeing that ruler lifted more than the actual strike itself. It brought back trauma. It was quick, painful, and meant to instantly remind kids to fall back in line. Today, the idea of an adult striking a child with an object in school would be grounds for immediate dismissal and even criminal charges. But in the 1970s, this practice was still considered a perfectly normal part of discipline. And speaking of pain, some punishments turned physical discipline into strange endurance tests. Number 7. Standing on one foot. Yes, believe it or not, some teachers forced misbehaving students to balance on one foot as a form of punishment. Imagine wobbling at the front of the class, arms outstretched for balance, while your friends laughed and whispered. Your leg would start to shake, your muscles would ache, and you'd eventually collapse to the sound of giggles. The punishment wasn't just exhausting, it was embarrassing, designed to make you look ridiculous in front of everyone. Instead of teaching respect, it turned learning into a show of endurance. Schools in the 70s felt more like a military drill than real education, right? But today, this kind of punishment would be labeled abusive and degrading. Back then, it was just another way for teachers to keep order through shame. And if humiliation in front of peers wasn't enough, the next punishment made sure every eye was on you. Number 8. Forced public apologies. Forget whispering sorry to your teacher. In the 70s, teachers sometimes forced kids to stand at the front of the class and apologize for even the smallest mistakes. Forgetting homework, talking back, or spilling milk could land you in the spotlight, hesitating through a tearful apology as your classmates laughed. It wasn't about accountability, it was about putting you on display as an example. Some students froze under pressure, while others cried their way through it. The memory of being forced to beg forgiveness often lingered far longer than the original misbehavior. Instead of teaching genuine responsibility, this punishment raised fear, resentment, and shame. Some students might sue their teacher if this happened today. But if being put on display was painful, wait until you hear how teachers made sure everyone knew your failures. Number 9. Public grade announcements. Remember how you couldn't even keep your report cards private in the 70s? Some teachers proudly read test scores aloud, ranking kids from the highest achievers all the way down to the struggling ones at the bottom. If your name came last, the whole class knew it, and the humiliation hit harder than the grade itself. Kids absolutely hated test days, not because of the exam, but because of the exposure afterward. Some students worked harder to avoid embarrassment, while others just gave up and accepted being made fun of. This created resentment, competition, and shame rather than motivation. Today, such public exposure of academic performance would be considered cruel, unethical, and potentially illegal under privacy laws. But in those days, it was just another way of toughening up students. And just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, teachers found a way to let the whole school know about your failures. Number 10. Displaying report cards on the wall. Yes, imagine walking past a wall plastered with names and marks, your classmates snickering if you were near the bottom. Struggling students couldn't get away from the stares and teasing of their classmates, or from the pride of the A students showing off their top grades. The system created a climate of competition, ridicule, and resentment, where learning was less about growth and more about survival. Parents often joined in the pressure, pointing to the wall as proof of success or failure. For many kids, this was less about education and more about public shaming in its rawest form. Today, privacy laws and basic ethics forbid such exposure, and for good reasons. Sure, public humiliation stung. However, other punishments hit kids in much more personal ways. Number 11, hair and dress code shaming. In the early 70s, strict dress codes were in full swing. Boys with hair even brushing their collars were sent home, or even had it cut on the spot. Girls with skirts deemed too short were forced to wear embarrassing cover-ups. Teachers called it discipline, but in reality it was control, policing identity and expression. Teens remember being paraded in front of peers as examples of what not to do. Today, such gender-biased enforcement would be called out as discriminatory and harmful. Speaking of personal control, the next punishment made sure you were left embarrassed in front of everyone. Number 12, public weigh-ins. In some schools, PE teachers lined kids up for weigh-ins, announcing numbers for all to hear. If you didn't fit the ideal weight, the whole class knew it. This left scars on countless children, creating shame around body image that lasted decades. Teachers often used weight as a weapon, teasing kids about size or forcing them to do extra laps. Nowadays, such cruelty would be considered outright abuse. And if teachers weren't humiliating students with scales, they were exhausting them with sweat. Number 13, gym class punishment drills. Drop and give me 20. This wasn't just a movie dialogue, it was reality in the 70s gym class. Push-ups, laps, planks, or endless sit-ups were carried out as punishment, often until students were sore and dizzy. Non-athletic kids despised PE, knowing one misstep could mean humiliation in front of classmates. What should have been a class about fitness turned into punishment disguised as exercise. Today, using physical activity as discipline is widely discouraged. But the gym wasn't the only place where teachers blurred the line between education and punishment. Sometimes, even your faith was put on display. Number 14, teacher-led prayer. Despite Supreme Court rulings in the 60s, many schools continued daily prayer or Bible readings well into the 70s. If you were one of those who didn't practice, you were automatically on their list for scolding and being isolated. What was framed as a moral exercise often turned into exclusion and pressure. While some families supported it, others saw it as overstepping boundaries. Today, religious activity in public schools is strictly limited. And while prayer set the tone in class, even smaller rule-breaking could lead to serious punishments. Number 15, chewing gum punishments. If you were caught chewing gum during the class, you might be forced to wear it on your nose, stick it in your hair, or write, "I will not chew gum" hundreds of times. Teachers hated gum for its noise, mess, and sticky aftermath under desks. But the punishments often crossed into outright humiliation. Kids dreaded getting caught with a pack, even though today it seems negligible. Chewing gum was treated like a crime, but wait until you hear what happened when kids dared to communicate during class. By the way, if you're enjoying this trip down 70s school hallways, hit that like button. It helps us dig up even more wild 70s stories. And don't forget to subscribe. We share a new video every other day. Number 16, publicly reading confiscated notes. Before social media, passing paper notes was the way to communicate. But if you got caught, you were in for a ride. Teachers often read your private words aloud to the whole class. Crushes exposed, secrets revealed, friendships ruined. It was the ultimate humiliation. Instead of correcting behavior, it was turned into entertainment. Today, such an invasion of privacy would be unthinkable. But you didn't stand a chance when they called in the judges straight from your own home. Number 17, calling parents in front of the class. Nothing was more terrifying than hearing, "I'm calling your parents right now." Teachers sometimes dialed home from the classroom, reporting your offenses loud enough for everyone to hear. The shame of your friends listening in was almost worse than the punishment waiting at home. Today, this tactic would be seen as manipulative and cruel. But if you weren't keeping quiet in class, trouble was sure to follow. Number 18, pop quizzes as punishment. Nothing sent a classroom into groans like hearing, "Take out your pencils, we're having a pop quiz." But in the 70s, quizzes weren't always about testing knowledge. Sometimes they were handed out purely as punishment for talking, being rowdy, or failing to do homework. Instead of a fair assessment, they were weapons of discipline. You hated them not because of learning, but because of unfair surprises. In today's world, the practice would be criticized as unproductive and demoralizing. And if that wasn't enough, Sometimes the punishment literally followed you home at night. Number 19, extra homework as punishment. Forgot to bring a pencil? Talked too much in class? You had to expect an extra essay or 50 additional math problems on top of your regular work. Teachers believed the burden would teach responsibility, but it often just made students resentful. Instead of learning, it turned schoolwork into a weapon. Parents weren't always sympathetic either, seeing it as character building. Today, people even argue about whether homework is needed at all, let alone using it to punish kids. And how can you forget having to carry every single book in your arms the whole day? Number 20, no backpacks allowed. It sounds strange, but in the 70s, many schools had rules limiting or banning backpacks in classrooms. Students had to carry heavy stacks of books in their arms or strapped together with belts. Teachers claimed bags were messy or dangerous in narrow aisles. The result? A chaotic mixture of hallway traffic and sore backs. Today, backpacks are essential, and banning them would seem absurd. And speaking of ridiculous rules, some classroom bans went way beyond understanding. Number 21, banning left-handed writing. In the early 70s, some teachers still tried to correct left-handed students by forcing them to write with their right hand. They saw left-handedness as sloppy or even wrong. Yeah, no one could grasp the logic behind it. Children were smacked with rulers or had pencils yanked from their left hand. It wasn't discipline, it was cruelty disguised as conformity. Today, such treatment would be seen as discriminatory and abusive. Changing your dominant hand sounds outrageous, but punishments based on gender were just plain cruel. Number 22, gender-segregated classes. Girls went to home economics, boys to shop. There were no exceptions. Cooking, sewing, and cleaning were framed as girls' work, while woodworking and mechanics were for boys. Those who resisted risked punishment or ridicule. This gender segregation reinforced stereotypes instead of nurturing interests. Today, mandatory gendered classes would be instantly challenged as sexist and a violation of equal rights. Classrooms were split by gender, and even lunch breaks were tightly controlled. Number 23, closed campus lunch rule. Many schools in the 70s banned students from leaving campus for lunch, and those who didn't obey faced detention or suspension. Some high schools gave seniors the privilege of open campus, but most students ate cafeteria food under strict supervision. Today, while some schools still have restrictions, the idea of severe punishment for grabbing a burger off campus feels extreme. Rules about food were strict. However, rules about respect were outright absurd. Number 24, mandatory pledge participation. Every morning, the classroom stood for the Pledge of Allegiance. Technically, kids had the right to refuse, but in practice, not standing could get you in trouble with teachers or even sent to the office. Social pressure was overwhelming, and refusal was seen as defiance. Today, while debates still spiral, students are more openly allowed to abstain. Now, on to the worst of them all. Do you remember being locked in silence all day long? Number 25, in-school suspension, isolation. In-school suspension in the 70s often meant being locked away in a tiny, silent room for hours, or even entire days. There were no lessons, no chance to talk to classmates, just a desk, blank walls, and the clock to look at. For many students, it wasn't about learning a lesson, it was pure isolation. Being cut off from friends and regular classes left students frustrated, anxious, and often falling behind in their studies. Some felt invisible, powerless, or even punished for minor mistakes. This experience bred resentment toward teachers and school rules, rather than encouraging better behavior. Today, education experts widely agree that such exclusionary punishments often do more harm than good, as they stunt social, emotional, and academic growth instead of promoting positive change. It's shocking how many of these punishments were normal just a few decades ago. From paddles to public humiliation, the 70s classroom was less about guidance and more about fear and control. If this trip back in time brought back memories or even made you shake your head, give this video a thumbs up and share it with a friend who survived the 70s classroom. Like and subscribe, as it helps us bring even more nostalgic stories your way.